I don't think Poe's arc in The Last Jedi really works. It's clear from the very beginning of the movie where we want Poe to end up. Leia needs him to grow and learn the difference between being a hero and being a leader. She needs him to stop thinking about doing the big heroic thing and start thinking about the big picture. This is the flaw that Poe has in this movie. A flaw that leads him to only see the results and not the lives that it costs. We need him to value both and know when to act and when not to. By the end of the movie, he has learned this lesson and become a better leader for it, or at least that's what the movie tells us. However, I don't think the movie lays the foundation for this development, so at the end it just sort of happens because that's where he needed to be, and not because the events of the story led him there. So what are the big events in Poe's arc? Well, we begin with the bomber attack on the dreadnought and Leia's reprimand, then his conflict with Holdo and the plan, and Leia's explanation on the transport. The turning point comes in the speeder attack during the Battle of Crait, and we wrap it up at the end of the movie when his transition to being a leader is acknowledged by Leia. The first big lesson is the bomber attack on the dreadnought. We begin with Poe distracting Hux and the First Order before charging the dreadnought and eliminating its surface cannons. Having removed some of them, he calls in the bombers. However, before they arrive, the last of the transports escapes the base and leaves the planet. At this point I have to ask, what is the plan here? And by that I mean, what is the goal? Based on what Leia says when she orders Poe back, it sounds like this was a delaying action meant to buy time for the evacuation to be completed. In which case, it doesn't really make sense that the bombers and the other fighters are deployed. Poe was able to accomplish the distraction mission all by himself, so what are they doing out there? I've seen some describe this as a good example of mission creep. Mission creep is a reaction to initial success that causes the expansion of the mission beyond its original goals. This incremental expansion can eventually lead to a point of failure where the entire mission falls apart. Poe's mission is to buy time to allow the Resistance to evacuate the base. He succeeds in doing this, but then expands the mission to eliminate the dreadnought. I don't think this is 100% correct. I think his goal is to buy time for the Resistance, and his plan is to do so by attacking the dreadnought. Since he's accomplished the goal, he no longer needs to complete the plan. However, at this point, Poe only sees the target, the dreadnought, and not the big picture, the escape and survival of the Resistance. This is why he ignores Leia's order and proceeds with the attack, and so does everyone else. Poe is being a leader here, but not the kind of leader we need him to be. Now, just because Poe was given an order, is he compelled to follow it? This made me think about all the situations that I've read about in history where a commander in the field made a tactical decision that went against an order from their superiors. On the one hand, there's the story of the Roman Manlius Torquatus, who issued an order that no man in his army was to leave his post. His son, an officer in the army, saw an opportunity to attack some of the enemy, which he did, and he won. However, he had disobeyed an order, and it didn't matter that he had beaten the enemy. For this disobedience, Torquatus had his son executed. On the other hand, there's the story of the Prussian major, who was reprimanded for a tactical blunder. His defense was that he was just following orders, and that Prussian officers were taught that orders from a superior were legally equivalent to orders from the king. This reprimand was being delivered by the prince, who replied, "His Majesty made you a major, because he believed you would know when not to obey his orders." This event was witnessed by the future chief of staff of the Prussian army, and he considered the lesson of that incident so important that he incorporated it into the training of all of their officers. My main point in going over all this is to say that just because he disobeys her order doesn't immediately make him wrong. He sees an opportunity, makes a tactical decision, and succeeds in destroying the dreadnought. His disobedience is not the problem. Leia doesn't reprimand him for not following her orders. She reprimands him for the cost of his action, and she tells him,
"There are things that you cannot solve by jumping in an X-Wing and blowing something up. I need you to learn that."
Leia wants him to see the big picture. The problem is that the Resistance does not have the resources or the lives to trade, even for a target as valuable as the dreadnought. He succeeded, but was it worth it? He thinks so, which is where his character is starting the movie. She needs him to be a leader, to value lives over results, and just in case that wasn't clear to you, when Poe tries to argue and says there were heroes on that mission, she answers,
"Dead heroes. No leaders."
And at the moment, she's not wrong. His action was a tactical victory, but a strategic mistake. With the loss of their bombers, the Resistance will not be able to repeat such an action anytime soon. The foundation of the lesson we want Poe to learn in this movie has been laid, and it's fairly solid. He succeeded, but it was a mistake and there were consequences. If nothing else happened with Poe in this movie, you could draw a line from where his character starts and where he finishes. It would be a pretty weak line, but how he got there would make sense. Having laid the foundation of the lesson, we should probably give Poe some time to reflect on what Leia's told him and give him the opportunity to grow a little bit. How long does he have to do this? Well, this all happens in the same scene, so he's only got about 30 seconds to absorb this lesson. Then the First Order, tracking the Resistance through hyperspace, shows up and undoes everything we just went over. Poe's action is now both a tactical and a strategic victory. It doesn't matter that it cost the bomber fleet to do it, because if they hadn't done it, the dreadnought would still be alive and they'd all be dead now. Remember, the dreadnought is a fleet killer, and the reason the Raddus isn't already dead is because the dreadnought captain fired on the base instead of the ship. The Resistance fleet is now out in the middle of empty space, and there's no better target for the dreadnought to shoot at. The foundation for the lesson we want Poe to learn has been utterly obliterated, and we can see that when he goes to Leia and says, "Permission to jump in an X-Wing and blow something up," and she says, "Permission granted." So where are we now? We want to get Poe from A, being an impulsive, reckless hero, to B, being a leader that sees the big picture and exercises better judgment. Before the First Order showed up, we had taken a good first step on the path from A to B, but now that the First Order is here, and Poe was actually right, we've taken a massive leap in the other direction. He's learned that his seemingly reckless action was correct. That's the lesson here. This sequence of events undoes the beginning of Poe's arc, but it does make Poe's interaction with Holdo a lot more logical. Not that what he does with her is right, but that the character thinks what he's doing is right. So let's move on to Poe's strained relationship with Admiral Holdo. The elephant in the room here is Holdo not telling Poe the plan. To address that, I want to talk about 4 things: the mission statement, commander's intent, disciplined initiative, and the locked room. A mission statement is the overall goal of an organization. Commander's intent is the desired end state at the conclusion of the mission. To put it another way, it shows what success looks like. Disciplined initiative is adapting or responding to threats or opportunities based on commander's intent. Or, if something unexpected happens, I don't need to ask the commander what to do because I know where the commander wants to go. Does Holdo provide a mission statement? She very clearly does.
This resistance must survive. That is our mission.
Does she provide commander's intent? No, she does not. When Rose and Finn come to Poe with an opportunity, he takes the initiative, but it's not disciplined initiative because he doesn't know Holdo's intent to get to the base on Crait. If he did, he could respond to their opportunity and say no. The last thing is the locked room test. If Holdo got locked in a room and we weren't able to communicate with her, what are we supposed to do? If nobody knows we're supposed to go to Crait, we could fly right by it and then run out of fuel in the middle of nowhere. What about Daisy? Seems like she knows the plan. But what if she's locked in the room too? What if the entire bridge crew gets taken out? Again. This is why everyone should be aware of the commander's intent. They don't need to know the specifics of what everyone is doing, but if they know the desired end state, they can practice disciplined initiative to get there. All that being said, there is a good reason for Holdo not to share her intent, and that would be if she was concerned about a spy. As I said in a previous video, it would absolutely make sense for this to be a concern, but this is not in the movie. This whole section of the movie, and most of the rest of the movie, is dependent on Holdo not telling Poe the plan, and I'm having a hard time trying to figure out what the lesson is supposed to be. Leia's explanation sounds deep, but doesn't really make a lot of sense.
She was more interested in protecting the light than she was seeming like a hero.
I think what this is supposed to mean is that Holdo was focused on their survival rather than some grand futile gesture. This makes sense if she's referring to Poe's attack on the dreadnought, which the movie keeps telling us was a mistake. This is why Poe's arc doesn't really work. This lesson is building on a foundation that wasn't laid correctly, because the dreadnought attack, while costly, wasn't a mistake. The best thing to do is probably try and figure out what he does wrong and how is he punished for it.
The greatest teacher failure is.
Well, Holdo should have told him the plan, and likewise, he should have told her his plan. He is wrong not to do so. The two of them withholding this information from each other leads to Poe telling Rose and Finn what he thinks Holdo is doing. Remember, he still doesn't know the actual plan. He doesn't find out what the real plan is until he's on the transport with Leia and Daisy, at which point he says,
That could work.
So how is he punished for this? Well, Rose and Finn get captured, DJ spills the beans, and a good portion of the Resistance transports are destroyed before Holdo pulls her maneuver.
You have bet the survival of the Resistance on bad odds?
Come on, that move is 1 in a million.
Now that is a costly lesson to learn, but I'm still not sure what the lesson actually is. We want Poe to see the big picture and not just the immediate problem. The issue here is in our current situation.
What's the difference?
Their survival is the immediate problem. If they don't solve that, there is no big picture. Holdo doesn't offer a solution, so Poe goes with Rose and Finn's solution. It's a bit reckless, but what is the alternative? The only other thing it might be is that when faced with a problem, he chose to do something, as opposed to what he was told to do, which was nothing. Had he done nothing, Holdo's plan might have worked, and we wouldn't have a movie. The lesson there isn't about the big picture or valuing lives, it's about blind loyalty and placing confidence and trust in someone who's done nothing to earn that confidence and trust. So let's move on to the final lesson in Poe's arc, which is the battle on Crait. Poe and what remains of the Resistance are trapped inside the old rebel base with no way to escape.
This is the only way in, or out.
They need to hold out until their allies respond to help them. At the moment, they're safe behind an armored door, but the First Order is deploying a battering ram cannon to crack that door open like an egg. They need to deal with this cannon to buy time and hopefully delay the First Order long enough for their allies to show up. Poe, Finn, Rose, and the other pilots charge the First Order using 13 rusty speeders in a desperate attempt to blow up the cannon. The First Order walkers and TIE fighters shred the formation, eliminating several of the speeders before Rey shows up and gets a triple kill to draw off the fighters. Of the 13 speeders that began the charge, only 4 remain: Poe, Finn, Rose, and Kai Threnali. This is the moment where Poe has his epiphany, becomes a leader instead of just a hero, and calls off the attack. He doesn't think they can make it to the gun before it fires. It would be pointless to proceed. The problem with this epiphany is I don't see this as him exercising different judgment than he has previously. It is a contrast to the dreadnought scene at the beginning of the movie, in that he's the one giving the order to retreat like Leia did, and Finn is the one who ignores it. But the situations are not the same. His plan to attack the dreadnought didn't need to be completed because their main goal was to buy time so they could escape. If he doesn't press the attack, they can just leave. As we've said, in hindsight, it was the correct move, but he doesn't know that the First Order has hyperspace tracking. Based on the information he had at that time, it was not the right call. Also, in the dreadnought attack, his decision to press on is based on his judgment that they can succeed. This is the opposite. He's making a judgment call that they're not going to make it to the gun, which is why they shouldn't proceed with the attack. But then Finn presses on, and he might have made it if Rose hadn't stopped him. In the director's commentary, Johnson says,
"There's the moment where Poe kind of learns the lesson from Leia that you should have learned in the opening sequence of thinking of the bigger picture of can't blow all of our best pilots right on a heroic suicide mission."
You're a bit late for that!
As I said, 9 of the 13 speeders are already dead, and just like before, the big picture is their immediate survival. What is the alternative? Remember the information he has at this time. There's no other way out, and if that door is breached, they die. He doesn't know that Luke is coming or that there is a back door. Speaking of Luke's arrival, this is the final stop on Poe's arc of learning to be a leader. Finn wants to help Luke, but Poe stops him. Poe recognizes what Luke is doing, so he says, "Follow me," at which point they all turn to Leia, and she says,
What are you looking at me for? Follow him.
Somehow, he's learned the lessons and has made the transition from being a hero to being a leader. But has he, or was he already there? The main issue with Poe's arc is that the situations that he's put in and supposed to learn from either reinforce his flaw or do not test his flaw in the correct way. His flaw is that he wants to be a hero who does the big heroic thing and that he doesn't see the big picture. In hindsight, his decision to do the big heroic thing to attack the dreadnought was costly but correct, as it would have killed them when the First Order showed up. This reinforces his flaw. His conflict with Holdo doesn't test his flaw because the big picture and the immediate problem are the same, the survival of the Resistance. Holdo gives no indication that she's doing anything about the problem, so Poe takes the initiative. This is a mistake, but this mistake is based on incomplete information. If he knew Holdo's plan and decided to still support Rose and Finn, that would be him giving into his flaw, and when it goes wrong, he could learn from that. But that would mean that all of these deaths are entirely his fault, which would make him an unsympathetic character, and we would probably want some atonement for that. On Crait, the situation is basically the same before Luke and Rey arrive. If Poe and the Resistance don't survive the immediate problem, there is no big picture. The situation as presented is, we need to blow up that cannon, or we die. That's not a big heroic action, it's what needs to be done. His decision to call off the attack seems like him showing the tactical judgment that we've already seen from him and not a sudden appreciation for the big picture, which again is win or die. So after all this, I don't see him as that different than he was before the movie began, and if he is, I don't see how he got there. And that is why I think Poe's arc doesn't work. If you feel differently, I'd love to hear from you. Go ahead and leave a comment. And if you liked or hated today's video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up or a thumbs down. If you want to see more, go ahead and hit subscribe. But that's all I got for you today. I thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you next time, and may the Force be with you, always.
Every word of what you just said was wrong.